Thank you very much for coming to this presentation. I'm sorry that I could not be there in person in Oxford, and I'm also sorry that this is a recorded video. Unfortunately, there's been a clash in the schedule that we couldn't resolve. If you have any questions or would like to discuss further, please do email me. Now, I've made a few presentations on loot boxes at previous SLS conferences. However, it has always been in the cyber law section, and this is the first time that I'm presenting in the open section. So I will start out by giving you a definition for loot boxes, just to set the scene, so to speak. Now, what exactly is a loot box? You can see an example on the right-hand side. These are virtual items in video games that contain random rewards. The player will spend real-world money to purchase them in order to receive random rewards of varying value. Most of the time, the player will receive something that they do not want, but rarely they will receive a valuable reward. These products are conceptually very similar to gambling because the player is spending real-world money to engage in a randomized process whose results are unknown and most of the time would lead to the player feeling as if they've lost out. Empirical psychology research has found that loot box spending is positively correlated with problem gambling. This suggests that video game companies are disproportionately profiting from vulnerable consumers through these products. This type of mechanic has been very controversial amongst player communities and has been the subject of regulatory scrutiny around the world. Now, this is a video showing what it looks like to open a loot box. You'll see that the product opens and then 4 random rewards are obtained by the player. In this particular example, only the 1 blue reward is rare. However, I think any player opening this particular loot box would have been disappointed because this is not a very good result. In contrast, the player might open a different loot box, such as this one, where once opened, you see that the player has obtained not just 1 blue reward, but also 1 purple reward. This loot box is more valuable, and the player is likely to be more satisfied with this particular loot box. However, this second result, is less likely to occur than the first result. How prevalent are these mechanics in video games that we play today? Research has been conducted examining the 100 highest grossing iPhone games. In 2019, 59% of those games contained loot boxes. In mid-2021, we found that this number has increased to 77%. We also know that this prevalence rate differs from region to region. In China, for example, and I think in other Far East Asian countries, they're more prevalent. For example, in 2020, 91 of the 100 highest grossing iPhone games in China were found to contain these mechanics. The current UK regulatory position in relation to loot boxes was published by the government last summer. In short, the government has refused to regulate loot boxes by adopting new legislation. Instead, the government decided to rely on industry self-regulation. This is despite many calls by NGOs and academics to potentially change the definition of gambling so as to incorporate loot boxes into that definition. The reason for not expanding that definition given by the government was that had this been done, the work that the Gambling Commission will have to do would increase drastically, and the cost associated with that might not be something that could be reasonably met. We know from research in other areas that companies and industry bodies in general are conflicted against acting against their own commercial interests. This means that industry self-regulation that other sectors have adopted have been proven ineffective or suboptimal. Therefore, given that the UK government is now going to rely on industry self-regulation for loot boxes, it would be fruitful to examine how effective pre-existing industry self-regulation of loot boxes has been. If it hasn't been effective, then we can identify ways to improve forthcoming self-regulation here in the UK. The video game sector is very much industry self-regulated. In relation to content moderation and age ratings, these are provided by self-regulatory bodies, both in North America and in Europe. The system adopted in North America is known as the ESRB. You can see their age ratings on the top screenshot. In Europe, this is done by PEGI, and you can see their age rating information on the bottom screenshot. If you yourself play video games, or you look at the games that your children might play, then you're likely to be very familiar with the age ratings shown for PEGI on the bottom right-hand corner. In 2020, both the ESRB and PEGI introduced one self-regulatory measure to address loot box-related concerns. Specifically, it is this warning label of in-game purchases includes random items. You can see screenshots on the right-hand side. Any game containing loot boxes or similar in-game purchases that have an element of randomization will be required to attach this particular label. This is intended to be a sort of present warning to help consumers make more informed purchasing decisions. If someone sees that a game has this label on, then they will know that this game contains loot boxes, and this might help them to decide not to purchase this video game, for example. Where exactly can this label be found? Well, here are some photos of a game case for FIFA 23, a game containing loot boxes. You'll see that the label is not on the front of the package. It is, in fact, only available on the back of the package. And you'll see that if you look at the bottom right-hand corner of the second photo there, which is zoomed in on the right-hand side, that label is shown in very tiny text. But it is there if you look for it. I conducted 2 studies to empirically examine how effective this measure has been implemented. The first study sought to compare the ESRB against PEGI. This was doable because the ESRB and PEGI, although they've adopted the same measure, they actually assess games separately and would attach the label through separate decision-making processes. However, given that the definition for a loot box used by both bodies is identical, we would expect there to be consistency between what the ESRB decides and what PEGI decides. Whether or not a game has been attached with that label can be ascertained by looking through either the ESRB or the PEGI's search tool. You'll see, for example, here in relation to FIFA 23, this is a game whose physical packaging I just showed you. Both rating bodies, ESRB on the top and PEGI on the bottom, have decided that yes, in this game, you can find in-game purchases includes random items. However, in relation to other games, such as Hunt Showdown Limited Bounty Hunter Edition, you'll see that the ESRB and PEGI have come to different decisions. This game does indeed contain loot boxes, and the ESRB has failed to label it in this instance. So like I mentioned earlier, in this first study, I pitted the 2 age rating organizations against each other to cross-check their results. This allowed me to not waste resources playing the games myself, because I can simply compare what their results have been. The preliminary results were as follows. So both organizations rated and had opportunities to label 66 separate entries. Now, 26 of those games, about 40%, were duly labeled by both. Very good. However, about 60% were only labeled by one of either organization. We found that the majority of those disagreements were attributed to the ESRB not having labeled the game as containing loot boxes. I originally conducted my own investigation as to why some of these games were not labeled. However, since finishing the study, I've had the opportunity to engage with both age rating organizations to find out exactly what has happened in all of these cases. 35 of the 40 disagreements were explained as follows. 30 disagreements were caused by the measure not having been implemented retroactively, mostly by the ESRB. So the ESRB said that any games that were rated before 2020, when the label was first introduced, were not required to attach the label. And this is why a lot of games did not have the label attached on the ESRB platform. However, PEGI has given companies the opportunities to obtain a label retroactively, meaning that even if that game was rated prior to 2020, if the company voluntarily decides to do so, they can get that label attached to their games. Out of those 35 disagreements, there were also 4 false positives. These were games that did not in fact contain loot boxes, but because the company likely made a very cautious disclosure to the age rating organizations, it showed up as containing loot boxes on one of those platforms. And finally, there was one disagreement where the European PEGI version of the game actually used geo-blocking to prevent loot boxes from being purchased. Now, these 35 cases are not particularly interesting. I think the ESRB should retroactively apply the measure because consumers do expect to see accurate information in all instances. However, 5 games remained, and one of them was missing a label from PEGI, and 4 of them were missing a label from the ESRB. PEGI admitted to having made one rating mistake in relation to that game. Specifically, even though a version of this game was rated before 2020, since then, a new submission has been made in relation to that game, and PEGI has had an opportunity to reevaluate whether or not that game contained loot boxes. And when it did so, it failed to identify loot boxes in that instance. The ESRB admitted to one of the 4 rating mistakes that were identified. That's not really worth discussing any further. However, the ESRB then refused to admit to 3 further mistakes. These were actually the same situation as what PEGI admitted a mistake for. New versions of those 3 games were submitted to the ESRB after the label was introduced, and the ESRB failed to attach the label during the new submission process. So to conclude, if we are to disregard the games that were not labeled due to the retroactivity issue, 31 games remained. Amongst them, 26 games were duly labeled by both age rating organizations, but 5 games were missing the label from one of either organization. The consistency rate between the 2 organizations was 83.9%, which is below the 95% consistency rate that I pre-registered as being satisfactory. We don't know exactly how many games were missing the label from both organizations. As the facts later developed, one game, at least, turned out to be such a game that actually failed to disclose loot box presence to both organizations and therefore was not attached with the label at both organizations. So there might well be more examples of such games. Since conducting the study, PEGI has fined 2 companies €5,000 each for failing to disclose loot box presence and failing to get that label correctly attached to their games containing loot boxes. Diablo Immortal was one of the games that was fined, and that game made over $300 million by November 2020. And so the fine, and we're only counting earnings up to that point in time, was only 0.0018%. I think it would be fair to say that such a small fine will not serve as an effective deterrent when companies can make so much money from these mechanics. So the first study has focused on games with a physical release. So these games will be put onto the market in a game case. This is why they're both directly rated by the ESRB and PEGI. In relation to digitally released games, such as games you might find on the Google Play Store, the system is different. Instead, game companies rely on the IARC, which is the International Age Rating Coalition. The developer fills in a questionnaire, and depending on their responses to questions on that questionnaire, they will receive an age rating that could be used in many different territories across the world. One of the questions that is asked has to do with whether or not the game contains loot boxes or similar in-game purchases involving an element of randomization. If the company said yes to that question, then they should obtain the label through the IARC system as well. This system is implemented on the Google Play Store. You can see 2 screenshots here. The left shows the US store, whilst the right shows the Danish European store. You'll see that on the US store, the ESRB rating is given, whilst on the Danish/European stores, the PEGI rating will be provided. When the player clicks on the age rating, specifically the tiny I symbol next to the age rating, a pop-up window would appear. On both the US and Danish stores, the label would appear on the pop-up window showing that in-game purchases, including random items, are indeed included in this game. I examined 100 popular games that were previously known to contain loot boxes on the Google Play Store. Amongst them, I found that 71 of them did not have the label duly attached. I replayed all 71 of those games to confirm that at the relevant time, they did still contain loot boxes. The ESRB response to this particular result, very unsatisfactory result I might add, was that the Google Play Store did not introduce this particular measure until February 2022, and any games that were rated before that time need not be labeled. Now, that is a very terrible response because most popular games, indeed nearly all popular games, were released before February 2022, and it makes no sense for those games to not be required to comply with this measure. I have since worked with the age rating organizations to get 77 of 84 games that I found to contain loot boxes to be newly labeled. However, this represents only a small minority of all the games containing loot boxes that remain unlabeled on the Google Play Store. The PEGI response to the very unsatisfactory result on the Google Play Store was that there is just too much content on the Google Play Store for there to be effective enforcement and compliance. Indeed, it is true there are more than 1 million games on the Google Play Store, and we're not even counting regular updates to many of those games. Specifically, it was suggested that we don't have these issues with other storefronts because other storefronts implementing the IARC system would have much fewer games to deal with. So I fact-checked PEGI and indeed the IARC on that particular claim. The results on the other stores are displayed on this table. You'll see that indeed, in relation to the major hardware publishers, specifically Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo, the compliance rate was higher. However, the compliance rates there were still not very satisfactory. On the Nintendo shop, it was just over 50%. Importantly, though, on the Epic Game Store, which supposedly has implemented the IARC system, the compliance rate was merely 7.1%. In my view, this is quite ridiculous. The system has not been implemented properly onto that system, but IARC is claiming that consumers can trust that particular store to show accurate age rating information. Separately, I think it is also important to mention research done by others. This particular label was introduced by both age rating organizations without any empirical testing of their effectiveness. Under experimental conditions by independent researchers, they found that consumers do not appear to understand the loot box warning label. Indeed, I think that does make sense because these labels use terminology that is not known to video game players. It doesn't even say loot boxes. This suggests that even if this measure was implemented properly with a 100% compliance rate, it might not have really helped consumers to understand that these games contain loot boxes and that there might be potential harms associated with engaging with these products. In conclusion, the results from these two studies show that consumers cannot trust industry self-regulation. We cannot assume that industry self-regulation will work in practice just after the industry has proposed it. Because of conflict of interest issues, we, meaning researchers, policymakers, regulators, and non-industry stakeholders, need to hold the industry to account by continually monitoring how these measures are implemented in practice. Indeed, in relation to the forthcoming UK industry self-regulation of loot boxes, we must continue to monitor how effective any of the measures will be. If they don't actually work in practice, then we need either stricter industry self-regulation or legislative intervention. Beyond the UK, many other countries are considering changing their laws to regulate loot boxes. For example, in Finland and in Brazil, there are outstanding bills intending to regulate loot boxes. In Austria, there was a recent court judgment that decided that some loot boxes are indeed illegal gambling under existing law, and their companies are obliged to refund any monies that players have spent on those mechanics. Finally, in the state of Illinois, there was a bill that has since died that sought to require a warning label for loot boxes. However, that warning label was drafted using very strong language that was reminiscent of tobacco or alcohol warnings, and indeed might have had a fear-mongering effect. That might be going too far. We need to make sure any consumer protection measure is appropriate and balanced. It needs to provide enough information without engaging in unnecessary fear-mongering. Finally, before I finish, I just want to mention how I conducted this set of two studies as a registered report. This is a new way of conducting empirical research that I will recommend to other researchers. Specifically, the introduction and method sections of the paper were peer-reviewed prior to data collection. This allowed for external input and indeed improvements to have been made before I spent the resources to collect data. This registered report format is also very cool because publication is guaranteed regardless of the research results, as long as the pre-registered methodology that was approved by the peer reviewers were followed. By using this particular format, I have been able to conduct this study and publish it very rapidly. This is particularly important for policy areas that develop quickly. Thank you very much for listening. The full paper has been published in Royal Society Open Science, available at the link on the slides, and all underlying data are publicly available as well. Unfortunately, I will not be able to answer any questions at this time. However, please do reach out to me by email or through social media. Thanks very much.